American art, so much art history in general, when we teach it, when we study it, we first learn about the things and how to describe the dynamics of a work of art. And we hear about formal analysis, and we talk about composition and line and scale. And you got to know that because it's kind of the alphabet of what you do. Because if someone says, well, what's the word line? You say, well, it's really real. It's like, well, what the heck does that mean? So you need to have some agreed on language. So it is kind of shop talk. And it can go, too much of it, formalism for its own sake can be a good cure for insomnia. And we also, as art historians, we often talk about emblems and icons and symbols, sometimes based on literary texts, sometimes based on folklore, and the object of studying those, translating them, we call iconography. I've become really interested in the claim of artists that somehow their art represents an experience. And I just wondered what that means, to have an experience. And my understanding of Innes, George Innes, and Thomas Hart Benton are two really good case studies for that. So in the trajectory of my comments, I'm going to go a little bit all over the place. I mean, George Innes and Thomas Hart Benton have little else in common other than they did a lot of talking about their Innes-ness and their Benton-ness. They spent a lot of time, they were both performative in a sense. They were very aware of their moment in history and the history of art. And they believed that they were recreating in their canvases some rarefied realm of pure, unadulterated experience. Innes played upon attitudes about the vaporous, moist atmosphere of Florida to create what he thought that was the feeling of Gulf Coast Florida in creating some of his most abstract works. Benton relied upon very commonly already known folk songs. I'd like to focus on two paintings. George Innes's Rosy Morning and Thomas Hart Benton's Wreck of the Old 97 here at the Hunter Museum, using these traditional tools of research to shed a little light on experience at three levels. That of the subject depicted, the larger strains to which the piece reacts, and, when known, that of the artists and their audience. Much of Innes's late work strives to convey an experience of heat, water, smog, or in a more literal sense, a sight conducive to subjective musing, experience in the sight in the sense of a concrete feeling. Innes did not think of these works as painted facts, but rather as evocative blurs where sensation is formed. He commented in 1879, "You must suggest to me reality, you can never show me reality." Now that's a neat quote, but I get hung up on, well, what was that reality in the first place? What kinds of experiences are painted here? Who is doing the experiencing? Well, answering these questions takes us deep into late 19th century Florida, where he painted most of these. Now, Innes, as is pretty well known, suffered from what's called dyspepsia, arthritis, and overall depression, what in that age was called neurasthenia, general nervousness. He drank a lot, smoked a lot, cursed like a sailor, very ill-tempered guy. And this brought him and countless others to the state of Florida. Beginning in 1890, Innes and his wife took up semi-annual residence in Tarpon Springs, a resort community founded in 1880, 25 miles northwest of Tampa. It was here on Florida's central Gulf Coast where Innes produced some of the most abstract American paintings to date, including the Hunter's Rosy Mornings. Florida tourist literature from the period emphasized the state's supposed healthfulness, and it's not difficult to imagine these books piquing Innes's attention. Guidebooks quoted doctors who deemed Florida's mild, warm climate ideal for invalids and those suffering from such ailments as gout, rheumatism, consumption, tuberculosis, and other respiratory diseases. Some of this literature addressed the very problems Innes experienced as he aged. In her book, Palmetto Leaves, a guidebook-like account of Florida, Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, obviously, wrote that Florida was ideal for, quote, nervously organized dyspeptics. Innes benefited from this dozing climate, and he appears to also have painted such a dozing landscape. Swathing his modern environs within painterly nature and suggesting a view of the world with eyes half closed, Innes's Florida paintings offer examples of a softened landscape. Painted in 1893, The Home of the Heron is Innes's best-known Florida composition and may represent the artist at his most abstract. Oblong arrays of black paint define trees against a vibrant sandy orange ground. Trees, marsh, and bird, and even architecture in the background exist as dabs of paint, seeming to float on the horizontal fields of color. The all-over application of brown, orange, and black, as well as the murky graininess, matches late 19th century descriptions of Central Florida's dense growth of foliage and tawny, ashen soil. But for all of its abstraction, Home of the Heron represents forms in, and apparently takes its title from, a set of rather stock conventions in promotional tourist literature, as in these two guidebooks that call Tarpon Springs area the Home of the Heron. And I wouldn't be at all surprised that the title of Rosy Morning similarly comes from promotional literature in Florida advertising. But as for Home of the Heron and related picture, it was the experience of softness that characterizes that home. In Rosy Morning, the blurring of contours effectively masks the sharp edge of civilization suggested by the architecture and craft and sail. With the light, shadow, and mist of one realm cloaking, perhaps bleeding into another, there's an easy give and take between otherwise disparate zones. And even the fence at left is less a solid boundary than a soft buffer. So welcome to Innes's Florida. In Innes's other Florida paintings showing herons, such as Gulf of Mexico, Florida, soft has a double meaning, this word soft. Obviously, the term characterizes Innes's technique. In Rosy Morning, he delicately but deliberately modeled the surface, resulting in a thinness and transparency, as one scholar puts it, of much of the medium. But in its seemingly woolly, undulating surface effects, the subject matter and its meanings appear softened too. The clouds, the masses of foliage, and even the architecture are treated to devices similar to those of the greenery from which they appear to emerge. Effectively softening Central Florida, Innes joined other intellectuals in attaching a visceral sensory reaction to the gauzy atmosphere of the region. And several individuals, in fact, used the term soft to evoke that sensation, including a young Ralph Waldo Emerson, who described his journey through Florida in 1826 to 27 as a softening southward. About a decade after Innes's death, Henry James traveled to central and southern Florida, putting in words something of the softened mist Innes had put in paint, only here taking on less vaporous and fluid characteristics, writing, "The softness was divine, like something mixed in a huge silver crucible as an elixir, and then liquidly scattered." Good Lord, he could write, huh? Innes's breathy abstractions, in fact, parallel contemporary meditations on vapors and related ethereal forms. He softened the harsh contours of modern life, proposing new ways of understanding and experiencing sensory information. But the most vaporous part of these works is probably the horizon itself. At the horizon, Innes observed, quote, and I love this quote, "All things cease to appear. All is light and flat as a fog of vapor that obscures everything," end quote. What these paintings, as well as the remarks of Innes and his contemporaries, suggest is that they all recognized and lauded a very specific sort of visual sensation, one that oscillated between seeing and not seeing, between knowing and not knowing. I mean, you're looking, what are you really looking at? Paint tarp on springs, but cloak it like your eyes are half shut, as if struggling to see through some gossamer haze. And do this, paradoxically, so you can actually experience it, so you can truly feel it. For Innes, fogging up visual details hardly meant abandoning vision and understanding. The opposite was the case. Forgetting, or at least redirecting one's visual archive, was the key to a deeper seeing. This mode bears affinity with writings by the mystic and philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg. Swedenborg's so-called theory of correspondences holds that every element of the natural world conforms to the divinity. For much of his adult life, Innes was active in the Swedenborgian church, and it is hardly surprising that in his quest for an alternative perceptual mode, he would find meaningful Swedenborg's justification of the spiritual within nature and the role of dematerialization in that program. In 1882, Innes told the critic William Sheldon that the real difficulty is in bringing the intellect to the fact of the indefinable, that which hides itself so that we may see it. Art is a subtle thing. It is not a thing of surfaces. Fogs and vapors descending upon and emanating from the horizon were a way to see beneath the surface. They provided an ideal means through which to buffer and mitigate empirical data, that intellectual baggage we all carry with us. So this all has a lot in common with other writers of the era, the contemporary evolutionary theorist Herbert Spencer's idea of the unknowable, and with currents in William James's contributions to psychology. But wow, this is all getting pretty wordy and over-the-top philosophical in a hurry. But I think the most important thing to remember with Innes and his wordy, absurd contemporaries is their insistence that landscape isn't some idle construct. Rather, it could represent experience in both the abstract philosophical sense, but also in a much more hands-on way, as in, this is what Florida's like, and I'm creating the experience of its foggy horizons and its blurry leaved trees.